Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Bas and in this video I'm going to knit a Spencer. Or it's also called a slipover, but it's basically a knitted sweater without sleeves. I'm going to knit it on this knitting machine. I've done several videos on this machine. It is my Passap Duomatic 80 knitting machine. It's a true double bed knitting machine and it's just a lot of fun to knit on. Let me show you how I do it. Okay, so a Spencer basically is a sweater without sleeves, with some ribbing on the bottom, some ribbing around the arm size and some ribbing around the neck. And I've decided on a V-neck. And I want it dark blue in color with some yellow stripes, yellow greenish on the top. Broader stripes with a bit of green, like this swatch. So how do you knit it? Well, like I said, it's a sweater without sleeves. So this is how you knit the back. And this is how you knit the front. I was gifted several cones of yarn without a label. So I have no idea what it is, but it is a very thin thread. And I found it too thin, so I took several threads, in this case 3, and I wound them into new yarn cakes consisting of 3 of the thinner threads. So I kind of made my own yarn. And with this yarn I made several swatches going from 5.5 to 6 to 6.5. And I looked at what I liked. And I chose a stitch size of 6.5. So this stitch size. And that's merely because I like this stitch size the most. It's about look and feel, and it's a personal preference. So you can choose whatever stitch size you like. This is what I chose, 6.5. And I also made some swatches in stripes. So I tried with blue, then a brownish color, blue, green. And I switched the blue and the green. And I also tried some other stripes. And in the end I decided to go with this stripe. That's 2 rows of green, 2 rows of blue, 2 rows of the brownish beige color, 8 rows of yellow, 2 rows of beige, 2 rows of blue, 2 rows of green, and in between I'm going to knit 10 rows of blue. So I have decided on stitch size 6.5 for my machine because I liked that fabric the most. And I get on a 10 by 10 centimeter square, I get a gauge of 27 stitches by 40 rows. So this is my gauge. Now, there are several ways to calculate a pattern like this. You have online pattern generators, you have pattern calculators, there are magazines with patterns in them, you have several yarn websites that offer patterns. So I want my Spencer to measure 54 centimeters in width and I want it about 70 centimeters in length. Now with my gauge and the measurements that I want, I can calculate the pattern. And then we can go behind the machine. Okay, I'm going to start with the back of my Spencer because the back is the easiest because it doesn't have the V-neck. So this is the easiest to start. And I'm going to have to start with 144 stitches, which is 72 needles on the left side of 0 and 72 needles on the right side of 0. And then I'm going to knit a 2 by 2 industrial rib for 24 rows. And I'm going to start with the needle beds exactly opposite of each other, so in full pitch. And now I'm selecting 72 needles to the right side of 0 and 72 needles to the left side of 0. And all needles in between. Same on the back bed, 72 needles to the right side of 0 and 72 needles to the left side of 0. Now I'm going to set up my needles for 2 by 2 industrial rib. And every third needle stays out of work. And on the front bed I'm putting the first needle on the right out of work, leaving 2 in work, 1 out of work, 2 in work, 1 out of work, 2 in work, 1 out of work, etc. You can do this by hand. Or you can use a selection comb. And in this case I have a selection comb with 1 out of 3. So there are many ways you can do things on a knitting machine. Same on the back bed, but on the back bed I'm leaving 2 needles in work, 1 out of work, 2 in work, 1 out of work, 2 in work, 1 out of work. So the same configuration, only I'm starting with 2 in work. And you can use the selection comb again. Now I'm adding the edge springs to the outer needles, making sure that the latches on the outer needles are closed. And to show you how a 2x2 industrial rib looks, I'm going to rack my bed half a turn clockwise. So an industrial rib is 2 needles, 2 needles, 2 needles, 2 needles, 2 needles, when the needle beds are at half pitch. Okay, so now I can start knitting my rib. And to do a cast on, I need to make a zigzag row first. But because a 2x2 needle division, the needles are in between each other, you can't make a zigzag. So I'm going to rack my needle beds 1 full turn counterclockwise. Now my needles are in between each other. In between each other, in between each other, in between each other. Now they can make a zigzag. Time to cast on. I'm going to set my front lock to N for normal knitting, stitch size on 1.5. I'm resetting the row counter. Same on the back bed, N for normal knitting, stitch size 1.5. Because I'm knitting on 2 beds for a rib, I'm adding the orange strippers for double bed knitting. I'm going to select my first color yarn, the main color is blue. Now I'm ready to knit the first zigzag row to cast on. So it is dark blue yarn, so difficult to see, but the first zigzag row is knitted. Now I'm going to set my locks for circular knitting, that's CX, stitch size 4 3/4. Same for the back lock, CX, CX, stitch size to 4 3/4. And I'm going to knit 2 rows of circular knitting, and that equals 1 round. Now I'm going to rack my beds 1 full turn clockwise. So my needles are back in 2x2 industrial rib division. And now I'm going to set my locks to N for normal knitting, and the stitch size stays on 4 3/4. Same for the back lock, N for normal knitting, stitch size stays the same. And I'm going to make my final row for the cast on. Now the cast on is complete. I'm going to reset the row counter, and I'm going to knit 24 rows of ribbing. I'm at row 23, so I only have 1 row of ribbing left, and I like to knit my final row of ribbing on a higher stitch size. So I'm increasing the stitch size to 6.5. Same on the back lock, 6.5. Final row of ribbing. The ribbing is complete. So now I'm going to transfer all stitches from the back bed to the front. And to make an easy transfer, I'm going to rack my bed so the needles are exactly opposite of each other. And I'm racking half a turn counterclockwise. I'm adding all needles on the front bed. I'm taking my double-eyed bodkin tool and I'm transferring the needles from the back to the front bed. Remove the edge springs. I'm gently pulling the fabric from below to make an easy transfer. Okay, so all needles have transferred to the front bed, so I'm taking the needles on the back bed out of work. I'm replacing the edge springs on the outer needles, making sure that the latches are closed. So now I'm all set up for single bed knitting on the front bed. Now I'm resetting the row counter. Stitch size stays on 6.5 on normal knitting. But because I'm switching from double bed knitting to single bed knitting, I'm removing the orange strippers and replacing them for the black ones. And because I have no needles in work on the back bed goes out of work on G, X. And I'm setting the stitch size back to 1. You don't have to do this because it's out of work on GX, but it's just good practice. And now I have to knit 150 rows, and then the decreasing for the arms will start. This is what I really like about knitting machines. It's just from left to right, from left to right. The sound of the knitting machine, each knitting machine sounds different. This Passap sounds way different from my Brother machines, from my Singer machines, from my Knittax machine. Every knitting machine has its own character, and I find it just really enjoyable. Row 150. I'm at row 150, so now I need to decrease 7 stitches on the right, take the locks across, decrease 7 stitches on the left, take the locks across, and then decrease 4 times 1 stitch every 3 rows, 4 times 1 stitch every 4 rows, and 1 time 1 stitch, and then knit 64 rows. And then we're at row 244. But be careful, because in the meantime, at row 180, we need to start with the stripes. But first, decrease 7 stitches on the right. Okay, decreasing, removing the edge spring. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is needle number 8. So when these stitches are gone and I'm on the needle number 8, I have decreased 7 stitches. I'm taking my orange transfer tool. I'm picking up the first stitch, placing it on the adjacent stitch, wrapping the yarn around it twice, 1 below the ledge, 1 in the ledge, and pulling the yarn through. 1 stitch decreased. Two stitch decreased. And now 7 stitches have been decreased. Now I'm replacing the edge spring, making sure the needles are out of work, taking the locks across, decreasing 7 stitches on the left side, removing the edge spring. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When I'm on this needle, I'm done. Finally placing the 7th stitch on the 8th needle, and now 7 stitches have been decreased. Replacing the edge spring, making sure that the ledge is closed, lock across. Now continue decreasing for the armhole, and at row 180 starting with the first stripe. Okay, now I have to decrease 1 stitch on the left and on the right, and I am using my 3-prong tool. You can use a 1-prong, a 2-prong, a 3-prong, 4, as many prongs as you like. They all do the job, but I'm going to use my 3-prong tool, and I'm going to decrease 1 stitch. Taking the needle out of work, closing the ledge, replacing the edge spring, removing the edge spring, shifting all the stitches 1 needle over, taking the outer needle out of work, replacing the edge spring, row 180, which means I have to start with my stripes. And at the same time I just keep on decreasing for the armhole. So I'm selecting the green color, and I'm going to knit my first stripe. back to blue, to cream, to yellow, back to cream, and back to blue. And we're almost done. I'm at row 244, so now I'm going to start the shoulder shaping. And I'm going to shape the shoulders with short rows. I'm short rowing 5 times 5 stitches every 2 rows, and then 1 time 6 stitches for the final 2 rows. And to short row, we're going to knit with the needle pushers. So for every needle that is in work, I'm going to add a needle pusher. And I'm going to put all needle pushers in work. Now I'm going to change the settings on the lock to knit with the needle pushers, and that's BX, BX. Stitch size stays the same. I'm not touching the row counter, I'm just continuing with my knitting. So all my needle pushers are in work, which means all needles knit. And I'm decreasing 5 on this side. So I'm taking 5 needle pushers out of work. So these 5 needles will not knit. Now, in order to prevent a hole, we're going to wrap the last needle we put out of work. So in this case, the 5th needle pusher from the left, the 5th needle from the left. I'm raising the 5th needle just slightly. I'm picking up the thread and I'm wrapping the needle from the front to the back, like so. Pulling the needle down. Now I'm going to put 5 needle pushers on the right side into rest. I'm going to take my locks across. From the front over to the back. Wrap. And wrap. So basically this is it. I need to have 50 stitches remaining. So I have 50 pushers in working position, which means the middle 50 needles are still in work. These needles are out of work and these needles are out of work. And my yarn end is over here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit to the left and I'm going to knit to the right, knitting every stitch. So I'm going to put all these needle pushers back into working position. Because I want to finish my work not with all the wraps and the short rowing, I want to finish my work in a clean knitted row. So I'm adding these needle pushers back into work. So from right to left I'm knitting this section in a normal knitted row. Now the same on the other side. All the needle pushers back into work. And now I have a clean finished knitted edge. And now I'm going to knit it off on waste yarn. So I'm still knitting with all the needle pushers. So first I'm going to knit the right shoulder off on waste yarn. I'm going to put these pushers out of work. So that's the stitches all the way from the left up until stitch 25. Now these stitches do not knit and these do. So let's knit about 10 rows of waste yarn. Okay, and I'm going to pass the locks without any yarn to drop these stitches off the machine. Okay, so these stitches are done. Now I'm going to knit the center part off on waste yarn. I'm replacing the edge spring, making sure that the latch is closed. And I'm going to put the needle pushers in the center 50 stitches. Now only these middle 50 stitches will knit, and I'm going to knit them off on waste yarn. Now I'm going to pass the locks across without any yarn, so the stitches will fall from the machine. Okay, so these stitches have also been knitted off on waste yarn. Also done. Now I only have the other shoulder left. So I'm replacing the edge spring, picking up the green contrast yarn again. Now I'm going to knit the final stitches off on waste yarn. So I'm engaging all the needle pushers in working position and knit about 10 rows. Final row without any yarn. And here is our finished back piece of the Spencer. So we have ribbing, we have the shaping for the armhole, and we have one piece of waste yarn for the first shoulder, one piece of waste yarn for the back neck, and one piece of waste yarn for the second shoulder. Now on to the front of the sweater. So this is almost the same as the back. You start with 144 stitches in ribbing, you knit 150 rows, you decrease for the armholes, but the difference is we're going to make a V-neck. So at row 160, we're going to start the V-neck. But the rest is all the same, so I'll skip over it pretty quickly and I'll see you when I get at row 160. Okay, I have knitted up until row 160. So now I'm going to start the shaping for the neckline. And you can only knit one piece at a time. So you can either knit this part or this part. And as is always, there are several ways to do so. You can take this part off on waste yarn and rehang it later to finish this. Or you can put these needles out of work with the needle pushers and only knit this part. And that's what I'm going to do. So for every needle that is in work, I'm going to add a needle pusher. So now for every needle that is in work, I've added a needle pusher, and all needle pushers are in resting position. So because I want to knit this part of my garment first, I'm going to leave these needle pushers out of work. I'm going to put these needle pushers into work. So from needle number 1 until the end. And to knit with the needle pushers, I'm going to set my front lock on B, X. Now the lock will knit with the needle pushers. I'm replacing the trigger for the row counter to the middle of my knitting, and I'm also replacing the edge spring to the outer needle. So now I'm all set up to knit this part of the garment. And on the left side I'm going to knit it with decreasing 7 times 1 stitch every 3 rows, and then 18 times 1 stitch every 4 rows. And on the right side I'm going to continue the armhole just like I did for the back of the Spencer. I have knitted up until row 180, so now I also have to add the stripes. So you have to pay attention to a lot. You have to pay attention to when to decrease for the armhole, you have to pay attention to when to decrease for the neckline, and you have to pay attention to when to switch the colors for the yarn. So really concentrate, just go row by row and it will all work out fine. Yellow. And back to blue. And now I'm at row 244, so I'm going to keep decreasing for the neckline, but I'm also going to short row for the shoulder. And now after short rowing, with all the wraps on the needles, I'm going to knit 1 row to the right to make 1 clean row of stitches. So I'm putting all needle pushers back into work and I'm taking my locks across. So 1 clean row of stitches. Now I'm going to knit this part off on waste yarn. Now knit the final row without any yarn and the shoulder will fall from the machine. Okay, so these needles are empty, so I'm going to put these all out of work. So now I'm going to knit this part that has been in hold all this time. So I'm replacing the edge springs on the outer needle. I'm sliding the trigger for the row counter in the middle of my knitting, replacing the right edge spring, resetting the row counter to row 160. So 160 was where I started the right shoulder, and now I'm going to start the left shoulder. The lock stays on BX to knit with the needle pushers. Now I'm going to pick up the blue yarn and I'm ready to knit the second half. I am putting the needle pushers into working position. So now these needles will knit on BX. You can also disable the needle pushers and knit on N for normal knitting. It all works out the same way, but since I'm already knitting with the needle pushers, I'm continuing with the needle pushers. And here is the front of our Spencer with the V-neck. So all that's left now to knit are the armholes, the ribbing for the armholes on both sides, and the ribbing for the neckline. And the ribbing for the armholes and the neckline is the same as the ribbing for the front piece of the Spencer. It's the same as the ribbing for the back piece of the Spencer. You select a number of needles, you knit the ribbing, and then I'm going to knit the ribbing off on waste yarn. So, and since it's all pretty much the same, I'll skip over it pretty quickly and move on. I have already calculated my ribbing, so for the armholes I need 54 centimeters, and in my gauge that's 144 stitches. And then I'm going to knit 10 rows of ribbing, and I have 2 armholes, so I'm going to do that twice. And for the neckline I need 71 centimeters, that's 189 stitches. However, my needle bed has only 180 stitches, so I'm going to divide the neckline in 2 pieces. And I'm going to divide it in a piece of 70 stitches and a piece of 120 stitches. So all the knitting on the knitting machine is done. I have knitted the back piece, the front piece, and the ribbing for the armholes and the neckline. So now I have to sew the Spencer together. You can sew a Spencer together in different ways. You can sew it with a mattress stitch, you can crochet it together, you can use a linking machine, a linker. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to link my sweater together on the linker. How to knit a Spencer together. We have the front piece and the back piece. First you sew together one shoulder, then you sew on the first part of the rib and the second part of the rib. Then you close up the second shoulder, then you sew the rib for the armholes, and now all the rib is sewn onto the Spencer, the armholes are closed, the neckline is finished. Then you fold the knitting double on itself, so this is all you have left. And then you just sew together the side seams. And my Spencer is done. I'm really happy with it. It matches the color scheme in my current wardrobe, blue, hence the blue shirt. It was a fairly quick project to knit for a garment of this size. It's just a sweater without sleeves, so I didn't have to knit the sleeves, only a front and a back piece, and then the ribbing for the armholes and the neckline, which was pretty quick actually. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel, leaving a like, leaving a comment. It all helps out the channel a lot. Thanks. I wish you happy knitting and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!